Today, I sit down with Kris. He shares with us his journey from finding out he had Crohn's disease, what this looked like for him, and how this impacted his life, both at work and his personal life. Kris is a very outdoorsy person, and he was scared he wouldn't be able to live the life that he already has been. And he was able to partake in a incredible 6-month journey, this hike with his two brothers. And this was because he was able to put his Crohn's disease into remission. This is an incredibly inspiring story, one where we learn about the constant battle he will have for the rest of his life with this disease. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome. How are you?
Yeah, doing well. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. It was a gorgeous day here in London, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was nice because you're back in the city.
Yeah. Is it your first day back, by the way? I think you said you're traveling up today.
Yeah, so it's one of my first days back in London. I'm not
Nice.
back at work just yet, so
Yeah.
we've got a little bit of time just to take a breather,
Nice.
let everything heal.
Yeah.
Still a
Well,
bit sore about getting there.
before we get all into that, I just wanted to say to everyone listening, Kris and I met at Warwick University. We were on the same program together. Whoop whoop. So I guess we started 2012 and finished 2016 together, right?
We did. Made it
Yeah.
through the end. Missing
Yeah.
Warwick. It was a
It,
great time, wasn't it?
it was. Did you think we'd be doing a podcast all these years later together?
Well, no, I didn't expect all the events of the last 5 years, that's for sure. Chatting after a pandemic,
Oh my God.
after all the fun stuff that's happened. But
It
no, I'm
is.
glad we are anyway.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like of everything that has happened, this is probably the most predictable, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly.
So Kris, tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into your story.
Sure. So my name is Kris, currently working in London, working as a financial services consultant. As probably your audience can tell, I don't sound English. I'm actually British American, so grew up in the States, then came back over to England for university, where we met Jess. And then since then decided I like the country enough to stay for longer. So yeah, I mean that's it in a nutshell. So been now in London since 2016, after a brief trip over to the States for the last 6 months.
Yes, so that's super exciting, and I'm excited to get into that. Before we do, you have Crohn's disease, is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
And is that the terminology for it? Is there any appropriate language I should be aware of?
Nope, that's it.
Cool. Okay, so would you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Yep. So Crohn's disease is a type of inflammatory bowel disease. Typically, it's unique for every individual who has it. For me, it's actually inflammation within the large intestine. As a result of that, people can either have a whole range of different symptoms, which are triggered by a lot of different factors. So it could be from stress, it could be from diet, it could even be from exercise. But in general, at least for me, it's been marked by abdominal pain, arthritis as well. This is one that I didn't expect. I have a form of enteropathic arthritis, which is caused by both Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, which is another form of IBD, of inflammatory bowel disease. So that's it in a nutshell. It's different for everybody, but it can be triggered by a whole different bunch of things. And typically, based on my understanding, it's usually the onset from it is from late teens into your mid-late 20s. So for me, I was diagnosed back in 2018. So that was when I was about 24. Time flying by already. Yeah, so that's quite typical.
Wow. And what are like the symptoms that you first experienced?
So for me, the first thing I noticed was really fatigue. It'd be
Yeah.
tough to get out of bed in the morning. I was exhausted all the time. And then I had stomach pains in general. I needed to go to the bathroom more often. And then finally, I started having joint pain. So originally, I had a knee surgery, a knee op, because I tore my ACL skiing back in 2014. And I started having pain in that knee again. And just figured it was because of complications from it. Then I started having the pain in my other knee as well. And then I migrated to elbows, fingers even. So kind of a whole range of different symptoms, which didn't really seem connected So after these started, about 6 months after, the doctors they said, "Hey, so we actually think it's Crohn's disease," which was unexpected for me. I'd never heard about it personally, so that was a bit of a shocker. But after a couple years of getting on the right medication, taking care of myself, managing stress appropriately, was able to put it back into remission. So as of before, at the beginning of this year, effectively was told, "Yep, you don't have any markers of inflammation. You're managing it well, and you're free to go do what you want for now while staying on the medication."
Whoa. So I didn't actually realize, like, because I think you and I spoke before and I hadn't realized
Yeah,
before that you could put it back into remission. Is it?
yeah,
Yeah, it's remission. So
yeah.
for you, do you feel like you have to live like quite in a controlled way? Like you have to manage the way you act and work out and etc.
Definitely has to be conscious of it. So the when I say remission, at least, or when the doctor said it for me, it is a temporary thing, at least. So Crohn's disease doesn't go away. It's something which you do have for life. It's a long-term condition. So to manage it and keep it in a state in which it doesn't impact day-to-day life, and to avoid a flare-up, I have to make sure my diet isn't too bad. I'm fortunate in that my diet isn't a big issue for me. I can pretty much eat everything that I used to. That's not the case for other people. So I know a good friend of mine in the U.S. If she has any grains or gluten, for example, it triggers her. So it's very unique to everyone who has it, which is frankly fascinating, I think. For me, it typically comes down to the biggest ones are stress. So if I'm really stressed out because of I don't know, some work or whatnot, that certainly can lead to flare ups. But the biggest ones are a lack of sleep and then alcohol.
Yeah.
So trying to manage that and not have too much or too little sleep.
Yeah, I feel like living in London, drinking, sleep, and stress are like the top three things people experience here.
Yeah, well, that's no surprise. I got diagnosed with it a few
Yeah.
years back now.
Wait, so could that have triggered it, or would you have always had it?
So typically, based on studies that have been done to date, it's triggered by one of three things. So it may be a function of genetics. So if your family has a history of it, you're more likely to have inflammatory bowel disease, more likely to have Crohn's. It's a function of environment. So if you're, for example, in a city, because of pollution, they think that there's some link between that as well. And then the third is from stress. So when I got diagnosed right before then, I was on a very difficult project, just having a difficult time with everything. So those three things may have likely led to that, but it's tough to be certain. But those seems to be three of the main factors which lead to it being triggered in the first place.
So I did some research before we spoke, and I wanted to get your opinion on this. I
Mhm.
One thing I thought was really interesting. They said that most of the people who have Crohn's disease live in developed countries and in
Mhm.
northern countries. So, out
Yeah.
of everything you just said, why do you think that is?
In terms of, based on my understanding, it certainly seems to be Crohn's disease, or at least what I've experienced, is part of this broader, I guess, at least recognition of autoimmune disorders across developed countries. And that may just be a function of the different diets which we have. I know certainly, uh, based on studies which I've seen, and again, not a doctor, but there
Yeah.
certainly does seem to be some connection there with additional pollution. So all those factors, which I said before, leading to more cases of it, or at least more awareness of those, and being able to say, okay, that does trigger or cause, we can see that this is why you're having these types of pains. So, I mean, as someone who's not a professional in it, I
Yeah.
certainly would think it seems, based on all, I mean, I'm probably not the only friend that you have as some form of autoimmune disorder. I mean, it does seem to be surprisingly, at least becoming more of an issue nowadays. It didn't seem to be something which our parents talked about. I know it's one which my parents didn't as much. And I'm wondering if it's a function of it just didn't happen. They didn't have these issues as much, or if it's actually, well, we're being more comfortable with talking about it, just like on this podcast.
Yeah, that is interesting. I think that they said they only had the language for it. Like it was, and this could be maybe just wrong from what I read, but in the 70s or 80s was when they were like, they've
Mhm.
diagnosed like what it is. So maybe that's why.
That would make sense. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it's every time, like every year, it seems that there's more information that comes out in terms of just diagnosing and understanding this is it, especially with it a condition like Crohn's disease. If it's not, it doesn't impact everyone the same way. So as a
Yeah.
result, it's tough sometimes to connect the dots. It took me and my doctor 6 months to get a diagnosis of it. So that just says something about how difficult it can be to identify what actually is causing a lot of these issues.
Yeah. And I think in England, like, how was that process for you? Because I mean, where I'm from, you see the same doctor, like that's the same
Mhm.
person every time. Was that the
Yeah.
same for you?
Yep. So in the UK, so within the NHS, so I had my GP, a general practitioner. So I went to him the beginning of 2018 and of 2017 and said, "Hey, I'm having these issues. I don't know what's wrong. Can you help me?
Yeah.
Can you understand what's causing it?" So he did an initial check. He understood the symptoms and said, "Okay, fine. Let's get you to the right specialist." So he referred me to a gastroenterologist, so to a GI clinic where I met a specialist who walked through the symptoms that I was having. At the same time, I was referred to a rheumatologist as well because of the joint pain that I was having and actual inflammation. So can't see it now, thankfully, but my right hand, for example, the joints were swollen up on the fingers. So he
Wow.
said, "Okay, there's something on here." So he directed me to those specialists who ran the tests, and were able to make a diagnosis after that.
Yeah. When you found out, like beforehand, I guess, was that really impacting your mental health?
Certainly, I think not knowing what was causing these issues and being just really in the dark certainly impacted how I felt. Um, Knowing or getting the diagnosis after certainly helped to alleviate some of the concerns and not know that it's better for me at least. It's nice to know that the devil you're dealing with instead of one that you don't
Yeah.
know. On the flip side, finding out that you have a chronic condition which is going to be with you for life, that's certainly humbling at the very least. Um, but yeah, definitely both before the diagnosis and after had an impact. Both in terms of, I mean, as I mentioned before, stress was a big thing that I think any of us dealing in London are dealing with, and that was only compounded by having these additional symptoms and issues.
Yeah. So for you, how have you mitigated the stress in your life?
So, I mean, this is probably the one way in which I've managed it best is really through communication. So, talking with friends, with colleagues about what I'm going through, both in terms of, for example, if we're having a difficult project, being clear about workload and saying, "Okay, this is what I'm doing, and this is potentially something I'm struggling with." And then in personal life saying, "Hey, I'm not feeling too great today, guys. I'm actually going to call it if that's okay." So having that open dialogue and communication is probably the biggest thing I've used to manage my stress, and that's still something which personally I'm working on. It's tough to go to colleagues and say, "Hey, I can't do this because I'm just struggling," or to go to a friend and say, "Hey, I can't really go out with you tonight. I want to see you, but I can't." Um, because you don't know how it will be taken. It's almost this fear of, okay, well, friends will be like, "Well, okay, it's just because he doesn't want to spend time with us," and not being able or concerned that they may not appreciate what you're going through. Thankfully, that hasn't been the case for me. I've had fantastic colleagues at EY where I work currently, and great friends both from university and elsewhere who understand and are willing to give me the space to manage it. So that's certainly helped with stress. But having open communication and being comfortable with talking about how you feel is
Yeah.
really the biggest.
I think it's also super hard because I think, like, I remember you at uni, like you are like you give 110% to everything, like A star kind of vibes. So I can imagine like you would never want to disappoint someone at work. You'd be like, ah, am I wrong?
No, I think you're spot on, and that was actually an issue that I faced with. Sometimes it was I needed to take my foot off the gas and not push, and that's the reality is if you almost give too much, you're going to hurt yourself, and then you're not helping anybody. If anything's a bit selfish, it's you're pushing yourself so hard that instead of taking the afternoon off, for example, that you needed to, you actually need to take a week because you've just pushed it too far. So it's recognizing what your limits are and making sure that you're managing them effectively.
Yeah, I think that's something anyone who even, the risk of Crohn's disease isn't even there. We all could take a lesson from that. I think it's interesting how like being in like your early 20s, like you kind of just do everything you're told and you just want to impress. And then I've found like that tip of like 25 and onwards, at least for like what I've seen of my peers, is people learning to set boundaries and
Mhm.
communicate has been impressive. So I'm glad that you feel like you're at that point. But for you, you got to tell us about the Pacific West Coast. I think I'm saying it right. Coast Trail.
Yeah, close. Yeah, so the Pacific
Yes.
Crest Trail.
So what led to that decision?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'd probably put it. There's two main reasons which I went to hike the Pacific Crest Trail, the PCT. The first is my brothers and I. We're all outdoorsy people. We grew up hiking across New England, sailing around the coast. We spent a lot of time outdoors. All three of us are Eagle Scouts. And we really have a passion for getting out and doing stuff like this, camping, walking. So that was one of the big drivers. And I actually started the trail with my middle brother and then my younger brother who came out. So all three of us were hiking at the same time. Unfortunately, one of them had to get off because of injuries he sustained on trail. But I did manage to finish the trail with my younger brother. So that's the first reason. It's getting out there, having a shared passion for it, and spending time with my brothers. The second reason is as you said, the Crohn's disease. So when I first got diagnosed, one of the I guess anxieties I had was, okay, is this actually going to impact? How is this going to impact me in the future? Am I still going to be able to do the things which I want to do? Or is this actually going to have a long-term impact on me that I can't control? So having pushed it or managed it successfully to get it into remission, I felt that I'd enabled myself to take on a challenge like this. And not just enable myself, I wanted to see how far I could push my limits and say, okay, this hasn't fundamentally changed anything. Yeah, there'll be times where I have flare-ups in which I'll struggle, but the reality is I can still do what I want to do. So those two reasons, getting outdoors and then proving to myself, really to myself more though than I think other people, proving to myself that, yeah, I can still do this. Those are the two main ones.
Yeah, I feel like that must have been such a relief for you as well to be, because you did love the outdoors, to be like, oh, thank
Mhm.
God, like this hasn't robbed me of like something that ignites my passion in life.
Completely.
So tell us about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, well, Jess was just an adventure. Let's be
Oh,
honest.
so
Yeah,
jealous.
I was crazy. But in terms of the trails, the trail itself is one of several national scenic trails in the United States. The three main ones, which people have more often heard about, are known as the Pacific Crest Trail, the Appalachian Trail, which is one that goes down the east coast of the U.S., and then the Continental Divide Trail, which is one that less people have heard of, that goes straight down through the middle. Those are the three largest national scenic trails in the U.S. So I hiked the PCT, which is it extends from the Mexican border to the Canadian border. In total, the length of the trail is 2,650 miles. Starts off on the border of Mexico. You can literally see the border wall there. You touch the monument and then you start walking. So you go through Southern California, through the desert. You go into the Sierra Nevada mountains. Usually with snow, you're climbing up and down these passes. And then you get out of the mountains and go into Northern California, and then through into Oregon and Washington through these dense forests until you hit the Northern Cascades of Washington, where you then finish on the Canadian border, literally border to border.
Wow. Honestly, I feel like there's something like quite, I don't know, the fact that you have to touch something in the beginning to like be like, let us begin.
Yeah,
That's quite,
completely.
was it like that on the end as well?
It was funny. This is going to sound very cliche. I think I was more stressed out, or not stressed out. I don't think that's the right term. I think excited and exhilarated and just a bit anxious almost about seeing this trailhead that I'd seen countless photos and videos of, and being there and saying, okay, the next time I see this is going to be 2,500 miles away. So that was kind of scary, but really exciting. And then seeing the end, seeing the northern terminus of the PCT, actually it wasn't as emotional as I was expecting, because I looked back and said, okay, this is really just it's almost arbitrary. Like, this is the end of it. The reality is this destination, it doesn't mean as much as all the experiences we had along the way. So I looked back and thought, okay, we had so many fun adventures and happenings along the way. That's what was really special. If anything, it just meant that it was over, and that was sad. But it was nice to be able to say, no, that we actually had a great time, and just so much to be able to take away.
Yeah. Was there
Yeah.
at any point where your Crohn's disease was flaring up at all? Did it provide any struggle on the way?
Thankfully, not as much as I was expecting. I was concerned that having a lot of exercise and pushing my body that much would lead to more issues. So on average, we had to hike 17 miles a day from beginning to end. And in reality, with rest days, most of the hiking we were doing was low 20s, at least when we got through the desert. So there are times in Oregon that we were doing back-to-back marathons effectively with backpacks on. And I was concerned that that physical challenge would really pose an issue for my Crohn's. But the reality is, the exercise actually helped a lot. So thankfully, no, to answer the question, I didn't. The issue I had, which I didn't expect, was actually getting medication and working with healthcare providers in the US to help manage it effectively. So for example, getting renewals of prescriptions while I was in the States, that posed more of a challenge than actually the Crohn's itself, which was interesting. But we got through it in the end, and made it all the way to Canada.
So that's actually an interesting point. So
Mhm.
with Crohn's disease, are you going to be on medication for the rest of your life?
Most likely, yes. So I'm on two types of medication. So I'm on a immunosuppressant to help manage inflammation, and then as well an anti-inflammatory. So the immunosuppressant help stop my immune system from attacking itself more, and then an anti-inflammatory to actually help bring down the inflammation, both intestinally and then as well with joints.
Okay.
So at least for the near future, I will be on them, if not fully long term.
Yeah. And you weren't beforehand able to be like, yo, doc, can you give me 6 months worth of medication?
Exactly. The NHS is brilliant, but they couldn't do that because of their policies, which is fair enough. Plus, I wouldn't want to carry it all that distance.
Yeah, that's true. So tell me about food then. Like because you were camping, some of it, all of it, no, staying in Airbnb, not Airbnbs. Where were you staying? How did this work?
We stayed in some Airbnbs. We did. Not
Nice.
often. There's not many in the mountains, but we did sometimes. But the reality, most of the time, I probably say, I'm probably gonna be off for the estimate, but I would say probably 6 days out of the week, if not more, we were camping in tents. So carried tents on our backs with all the equipment that we need to camp out, both obviously a tent itself, but also like sleeping pads, sleeping bag, warm clothes if it got cold at night, in addition to all the other gear that we're bringing. But then every so often we'd end up in a town that we'd actually stay the night in, just to rest, to take a shower so we didn't smell as bad,
Yeah.
and frankly to rest. So when they actually call, if you take a rest day, so if you're not actually hiking, it's called taking a zero, so doing a 0 mile day. So if you're taking a zero, you might actually just stay the night in town after you get all the food that you need, and do all the other admin that you have to do when you finally get Wi-Fi again.
Taking a zero. I feel like I'm down with
Taking a zero.
the lingo.
Yeah.
So like, so you'd take a zero and you would go get your groceries and then fill up your bag. Is that how that worked?
Yeah. So you'd arrive in town, and you might have just spent 3 days in the backcountry. You could have spent up to 7, 8 days. I think the longest food carry that we did was, I think it was 7.5 days. That was the max that we did. But some people do longer. So you get into town, you need to resupply to get food to carry you through the next section, however long it is. You may need to pick up additional random supplies like toiletries. So if you've run out of soap, so if you typically carry like a little bit of camp soap, so that kind of stuff. Or if you need medication, go to the pharmacy to pick it up.
Yeah.
So it's case getting new food, more food for the next section, getting anything else that you're running out of, and then completing tasks. So for example, for some sections, there wouldn't be a supermarket, which we could go to. They might be too difficult to get to a town. There would literally just be a post office. So one of the final towns we went to, this place called Stehekin, on Lake Chelan in Washington. There wasn't a supermarket. It's not even a town. It's just this lovely little community on the lake. So we actually had to send ourselves a box of food through the post office that we could then take to help get us to Canada
That's
within the
smart.
timelines that we had.
Thank you,
Yeah.
technology.
Thank you, technology and the USPS.
Shout out.
Shout out. Yeah.
Okay, so it was amazing. You finished it. You're back in the real world, as we call it. Sadly, not sadly. I'd be sad because I feel like that would be a trip of a lifetime. Is there any anxiety that like the stress is going to pick up again now that you're getting back into the swing of work?
Yeah, I definitely think there's an element of what is going to be like to go back to work again. I mean, I'm thankful. I mentioned before, my colleagues are so supportive. So I'm actually, the part I'm looking forward to the most is seeing my colleagues again and working with them, and then my clients as well. I am looking forward to that part the most. Just being on the team. There's definitely an element of, okay, am I going to be stressed out again? How's it all going to pan out? But the reality is, I was doing fine before. I still love my job. And if anything, I'm going back with a better perspective of everything. So a sense of, okay, this isn't the work that we do on a daily basis. And I'm going to project to say for everybody, it helps put things into perspective. You're not just, you're sending off emails. It's important, the work that you do for others. But it's not like you're getting enough food to make it through the next mountain you have to climb over. It helps make it seem more realistic and more manageable.
Yeah, I feel like you should quit EY, start EY, and do motivational speaking. Go tell everyone about like your experience and doing it, the fact that you've had Crohn's disease. I feel like that's so inspiring. So, I've got 3 more questions for you. Number
All right,
1,
let's hear them.
what was the biggest lesson you learned on the mountains trail?
The biggest lesson. I thought about this one a bit actually, just separately. It sounds cheesy when I say it, but it couldn't be more true. It's really the importance of mindset. The Pacific Crest Trail, any trek like this, is certainly a physical endeavor. You're putting your body through hell. You're doing things which, frankly, I could never see myself doing. And yet your body can take it for the most part. The challenging part is actually being mentally prepared for it. So saying, yeah, I can cover that distance. I can deal with my water filter breaking in the desert and not having clean water for a bit. I can deal with carrying all this food that I need for the next 7 days. I can deal with almost stepping on that rattlesnake and then falling back and thinking, oh God, if that happens again, I might die in the middle of nowhere. These types of challenges that you face, for me, I worked on being positive as much as possible. And the reality is, if you can face these challenges and come out smiling, then you're going to have a more fun time in general. You can laugh about it, and you're more likely to succeed. So when actually at the beginning, I hurt my knee. It was the same knee that I actually tore my ACL in. And immediately I was concerned that it was game over for the trail. And I don't even think it was 100 miles in. So immediately I was thinking, oh my God, am I seriously going to have to give up so soon? But I took a step back and said, hey, this isn't game over. I'm not going to let this be the end. So sat down, gave it 15 minutes, stood up and said, nope, that is still definitely hurting. So I gave it an hour, I taped it up, I made camp that night on the trail, and then I hobbled down the mountain I was on to get to a safe spot, and then just took it slow and managed to recover and get through it over the length of it. But to be honest, if I had gone into it saying, actually, I'm not sure I can do this anymore, it took a negative mindset, it certainly would have held me back and made me feel worse.
I really think that that's such a good a mindset. It's how I've been feeling lately. Like everything is like positive mindset, and just making that little shift, because like we are here for such a short time, and it's like,
yeah,
just see life as a bit more of a laugh, honestly. Like,
it's so true.
when you're shoved on the underground and in someone's orbit, you just gotta be like, wow, this is great. So
Yeah.
you can take these lessons forward of mindset, everyone. So question number 2, what
Mhm.
advice would you give to people who have recently been diagnosed with Crohn's disease and are feeling like quite disheartened about potentially their future? And like you said, you were worried about whether it would change your lifestyle.
Mhm. So I guess probably the first thing is I hope my story and what I went through is some level of inspiration. Say, hey, you can still do these things. And everyone's going through a different challenge, and I wouldn't want to say like, hey, wouldn't want to diminish anything else anyone else is going through. I was very fortunate that at least for my case, I was able to do this. But certainly, I hope it serves as some example of, hey, if you put your mind to something, you can still do it. So there's hope. There's hope you can still do anything that you want to do. But the main one, in terms of an actual practical lesson, I'd probably go back to one of the first points, just about communication. It's don't sit on it. Don't just dwell on it. Tell people how you're feeling, and be honest and clear. So, for example, if you're having a rough day, if you're just feeling like crap, it's okay to go tell your manager, your partner, hey, I'm just not doing well today. I'm probably going to need to take a breather. And more often than not, you'll have a better reaction or a better response than you may be expecting. And it's okay to say that. A lot of times I stopped myself because I didn't want to seem weak, or seem like I was letting myself down or failing. But the reality is, it's not. It's not failing by saying, "Hey, I need a hand," or "Hey, I'm struggling with this." It's a recognition of what you're going through. And frankly, uh, I think you have to be brave to some extent to be able to admit that and not just shove it down and try and put it away. So that's probably the main thing I'd say.
Yeah,
If that's
I think it
helpful.
is really brave. I think it's scary to especially like to managers and people at work to say
Mm.
like put your hand up like look, I am feeling overwhelmed, I am feeling stressed. But yeah, I think there's this whole movement of it's okay not to be okay, and there's a great song that's called that. Anyways, back on track. Number 3, final question is,
Mhm.
what advice would you give to people to support their loved ones, their friends, their colleagues, their partners going through what you've been through with Crohn's disease?
Okay, so how can people around you support you?
Yeah.
I would certainly recommend that people educate themselves on what are these disorders, so that they can better understand or start to appreciate what you're going through. Uh, I think sometimes it's one of the things that bothered me when I said, "Oh, I'm just tired all the time." Um, it felt like I was almost, I don't know, going back to the point, feeling a bit weak. It wasn't. I felt like people wouldn't understand what I was going through. So having or directing people to resources both from UK Crohn's and Colitis, I'd certainly recommend that. They actually have a full guide, not just for people who are suffering, but for friends and family, for colleagues, which I highly recommend people read. That outlines what can you expect. And how best could you support other people. So if I were to summarize, it's probably help them understand by giving them resources or pointing them in the direction of ways that they can learn about it. And that
Yeah.
will help them appreciate what you're going through.
Yeah, I agree. Education, and like I think from like what you said in the very beginning, you were talking about how, having people understand when you said like, I don't think I can come, guys, I'm really sorry. Like
Mhm.
allowing being a flexible person sounds like it could be very helpful if you need to change plans last minute. Like if you're tired, you're like, I'm sorry, I can't come.
Yeah, and having that understanding, so your friends knowing that, okay, well, it's not because he doesn't or she doesn't like me, it's because that they are going through something.
Yeah.
And that probably has broader implications than just for Crohn's, I would think. It's understanding, seeing what your friends are going through, and having that, I guess, level of understanding and flexibility. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Cool. Well, Kris, it's been so nice to see you and to hear your journey. It's definitely been one that I've found really inspiring, and it's been so nice to reconnect because everyone out there,
Yeah.
Kris and I haven't spoken since we graduated. Well, we bumped into each other once in London. But I saw a post that he put on LinkedIn about this and this experience that you've gone through. So it's been so nice to reconnect, and I will see you for a beer soon now that COVID allows. So
This sounds like a plan. And likewise, Jess,
Yeah.
thanks for reaching out and for hosting this brilliant podcast. It's been a pleasure listening to them. So thank you for doing this. And
Yeah.
it's been
Thank
lovely to
you.
reconnect.
Cool. All right. Well, have a good one. Bye, Kris.
You too, Jess. Have a good one. Bye.